I want to do a little chat just to advocate, I guess, on behalf of people that have received narcissistic abuse or CPTSD survivors that have gone through that and are recovering from that. And it's speaking to, I guess, in a non-judgmental way, but also just probably a way to actually keep an open mind around when trauma survivors actually do start to speak of these experiences, because it's quite brave to actually speak of these experiences. It's not easy to speak of these experiences. It brings up sometimes emotions to speak of these experiences. And sometimes our experiences that we went through, it's the difficulty to actually speak up about it is because we were denied so much of our experiences, that we were told that we were wrong to have these feelings and that should be feeling ashamed of ourselves or feeling guilt because we're actually starting to stand up for ourselves. And these sorts of things are manipulation tactics from a narcissist to keep you silent. You need to be quiet. You can't be speaking up for yourself because you might start to speak of the truth or speak of opposition to someone that wants you compliant to their way of being. And there also is, in that process, especially if we get a little bit more public with it, speaking with friends or whatever, where you might come across the comment of, well, if you don't know that they have been diagnosed with narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder, then you can't actually say that they have narcissism. And I want to kind of speak to that statement because, yes, it does have validity to it, but it also adds to probably the silencing, the, I guess, shaming in a way towards being able to speak up and say that this did happen. Now, it just doesn't apply to narcissism. If you've ever had a down day, for example, or down maybe a few days, maybe a week, maybe you've been low in energy, lying in bed for a few days, just not really feeling it, and you might say to yourself, well, I've got depression. Or someone might observe you with this and go, you've got depression. Or you might be cleaning the house or checking your front door because you weren't too sure if you locked it. And it's like, wow, I'm being really OCD about this. Or you might just be really high energy, really excited, hard to focus on things sometimes. And God, I'm just so ADHD right now. These sorts of things are generalizations that we make for ourselves or we make for others. It's almost like we have the DSM and these are the pop terms of how to classify ourselves. Most of it is basically just extensions of normal human behavior, where if we're just feeling flat, we might just need to rest because we've been doing so much, or we're facing a problem that we just don't know how to fix, whether that means that we have to then actually get a diagnosis of depression, receive medication treatment, receive psychological treatment for that official diagnosis of depression, or it might be just a low mood that will pass. We might be just really high energy. We might be just going for a bit of an ecstatic moment, but it passes and we just return to our normal even flow. Or we might just be a little bit worried about something at this time, or our focus is not there and we weren't really focusing on locking the door. We were more focused on what we were needing to do on that day, and I just had to go back and check it. And it doesn't quite mean that I need to now have treatment for OCD. Similar with autism and somewhat with narcissism is we're all on the spectrum, as I say, with autism. And you could also sort of say we're all on the spectrum with narcissism. We all have narcissistic traits within ourselves. I have narcissistic traits, you have narcissistic traits. Most people have narcissistic traits because it means that we have a good love of our own self-image. And it's a healthy thing. Where it becomes unhealthy is where our image of ourselves becomes distorted and we don't like to accept some things of ourselves and we like to project that onto others, which may lead to, hopefully, if a narcissist who receives a diagnosis, who suddenly sat there one day and went, hey, I might be the source of all the troubles around me. Some of my behaviors might be very manipulative. I feel this is actually wrong. I might front up to a psychiatrist and get myself diagnosed, so then I know. then I guess we would know that said person would be a narcissist. The same as we would know if we rocked up and got the diagnosis of depression or whatever it is. But sometimes even people like myself, where I received two diagnoses of schizoaffective and absence seizures, which is a form of epilepsy, sometimes it's not always accurate because I also was misdiagnosed. It turned out to be CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and the absence seizures was dissociation. And I went through all the EEGs and I went through the psychiatrist, did it all properly and came off the medication properly. So even if we get the diagnosis, sometimes not always guaranteed, given the environment that we're in. And I was definitely in an environment that was not conducive to my well-being and had very narcissistic-like qualities to how my environment liked to interact with myself, and now how I have to recover from my environment. Now, there can also be with narcissism where if there's a marriage breakdown, if there's a relationship breakdown, if your boss is a certain way, community people, where there might be the tendency to go, well, that person is narcissistic, or my ex was narcissistic, or the person that runs whatever group is narcissistic, sort of thing. Once again, until that person fronts up to a psychiatrist or whoever and receives that diagnosis, we don't know. And also, the person might just have very good qualities of not being a nice person, qualities of being either permanent or temporary, being an asshole, sort of thing. We all have our down days, and I guess it's how persistent we are in making other people down in those days. And sometimes we don't actually know that sometimes our behaviors are the reason why said person is having the difficulties from us. Where I'm leading with this is when we start to front up to a therapist, be it a psychologist or a psychiatrist, that can make these diagnoses. Not all psychologists can. There is that part where we start to speak of our experiences. We start to speak of what happened to us, and we start to explain our emotions and start to explain the limitations to our life, what's stopping us. And I guess a good therapist is not immediately trying to tick you into a box. It is actually trying to learn whether it's you, your environment, both, to lead to a good summary of a person's experiences to go, well, yeah, it's been a little bit long that you've actually been lying in bed all day, or it might be that, it's like you really are a bit worried about the security of your house, or where items are placed in your house, or having an attachment to inanimate objects that you're hard to let go of, and you're collecting quite a bit of that, or that high energy where it's like you really are, that it's really impeding your life. It's like you can't actually focus on things, and we might be focusing on leaving one electrical appliance on and going to another thing. So there might be some dangers there, or you might be dealing with things where it's like your perception of yourself has a real, low confidence. You're always pleasing of others. You're scared to make waves, or you're not being able to grow upon yourself because you're worried that you might hurt other people's feelings constantly, or you're always having to check in with the other person to make sure that you're allowed to do things, or these sorts of things where you might start to, with the therapist, where the therapist starts to identify that, hey, you seem to be dealing with a lot of the traits of narcissistic abuse. Here's also the catch for the therapist, because they can probably make an informal diagnosis of, in this case, the possible narcissist. But with a psychologist or a psychiatrist, they have to remain objective. They just can't go, well, I really like your shirt, or I really like your personality, sort of thing, so I'm just going to agree with whatever you say. They have to listen ongoing to what you're actually presenting with. And if what you're presenting is very authentic to those experiences of narcissistic abuse, then it may be that you received abuse from narcissism, but they can't actually say that that person is a narcissist because they're not officially there to do the diagnosis with it. So it's kind of like if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's quite possibly a duck, but we can't actually term it a duck, which is really ducked. Because the thing is, it's like you're receiving all the treatment for abuse. It would be the same if you had a car crash and you front up to the hospital and you've got all the injuries of a car crash. You might have the bumper sticking out of you sort of thing, but they're sort of like going, well, we can't call it a car crash because we don't know the make and model of the car, but you are receiving the treatment for a car crash. But if you're receiving treatment for narcissistic abuse, if all the symptoms that you're presenting with, then there's a good chance that it's not going to be because you're receiving it from OCD abuse or depression abuse or all these sorts of things. It's probably going to be the symptoms may directly correlate to the cause where it came from. But we always have to exercise caution because that person might not. They might have other traits. They might, and what class of narcissism are they? But where the advocating part comes out is a person that is receiving treatment for this. A part of their recovery might be to have their voice, to vocalize it, whether it's on YouTube or just to people around them. Then that's a huge thing for them, and a huge thing where they've been denied their experience, denied who they are as people, denied to be able to have their own feelings for themselves, to have their own sense of identity for themselves, because they always had to live in the shadow of someone that was taking from them, being so big and great. But behind closed doors, they were a completely different person. And for the person that's saying it's not narcissism because they didn't receive the diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, how do they actually know themselves? Are they the ones that are qualified to say that your experiences aren't valid, which actually adds to the abuse? It's also knowing that if they don't know what happened to you, you don't need to validate your experience to them. They're not the people to say that, well, if they didn't receive a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, you can't say it's narcissism. Because would it be better if the narcissist presented their certificate of approval from the psychiatrist saying, yes, here's my certificate saying that I'm a narcissist and I abuse this person. It's authentic abuse that they went through, because that's kind of what it implies. It's like, unless this person is officially qualified to abuse you sort of thing, then it's not abuse. If you're going through recovery from the abuse of narcissism, then once again, we can't officially say, but it's pretty likely that you're not receiving treatment for something else. It's not like a broken leg sort of thing that you're receiving treatment for. So does it actually justify it more that the person has a diagnosis? Is it some of what you're saying making them feel uncomfortable? So to deny you of your experience is to dismiss the abuse altogether. And that, for me, to be around those sorts of people, and people that don't know of my experiences, don't know what I've gone through, they're not the helpful people that I want in my life. And there is the understanding there that we don't know, and even if we knew, it doesn't make it better. It's kind of like sometimes I'll have a little aha moment into some of what I've received, the abuse. But it's not an aha moment of like, oh, that's really good, I've got some good insight. It's an aha moment of how I was not treated good, and now what I need to now address, and now what I need to, of myself, of my personality, start to rebuild and recover. So for the people that are saying that, well, if you don't have the official diagnosis sort of thing, it's like, we've had the car crash, it's like, it's pretty likely that you're recovering from the symptoms of a car crash, whether we need to know the make and the model of the car to recover from that, and whether we'll ever officially have the narcissist, which a big part of it is they're not going to really rock up to the psychiatrist willingly or perceive that they have an issue themselves. That's the big part. And some of, like, with CPTSD survivors or trauma survivors, a big part of them might have been trying to get the narcissist, like presenting this material to them to say, hey, can you change? And then completely just destroying your will for actually assuming that they had issues. That's going to be a huge thing. But I think where we can just be a little bit more open-minded and know that this is where stigma can come from. Yes, there might be people out there that are categorizing people or categorizing themselves with depression, with all these sorts of things, including narcissism, which might be just the next pop term at the moment. But even though there's a small percentage of people that do get diagnosed with narcissism, there's also a percentage of people that are recovering from the abuse of narcissism. And it's to keep in mind that it is a mental health diagnosis, narcissistic personality disorder. And even though CPTSD isn't in the DSM, it is something that we are recovering from. This abuse, the symptom is debilitating. It's not an easy life, and it's not a life that we chose. So with all forms of mental health, it's keeping that mental health awareness, and that knowing that that stigma is there, and also knowing that if we catch ourselves going, oh, I'm feeling depressed, sort of thing, but then also on another hand going, well, you can't diagnose someone with narcissism, sort of thing, because narcissism just sounds bad and you can't say that. There's going to be a hypocrisy that's happening there. So just having that awareness within ourselves that people are going through recoveries from this, and some of that is actually having their voice that has been silenced for so long, and for them to speak up is a huge thing. Also, people that are recovering from the symptoms of narcissistic abuse that will never know if that person is actually a narcissist. But once again, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, then you might be healing from the symptoms of a really ugly ducker that has affected your life quite a bit. So yeah, it's something to keep in mind. I'm Dion from eFlotion Support Services, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.